This is Amud Yomi, Gemara Berachos Daf Yod Gimel Amud Aleph, as we Baruch Hashem conclude the first parak. Let's pick it up from the bottom of Yud Beis, Amud Beis, the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Maskir Yitzias Mitzrayim Ba'alei Lois. We have an obligation to mention the Exodus, Yitzias Mitzrayim at night. Amar Rav Elazar ben Azariah. Harani kiben shivin shana. I was like 70 years old. V'lo yizachisina. I did not marry. Sheter Yitzias Mitzrayim Ba'alei to say Yitzias Mitzrayim at night. Obviously, he mentioned Yitzias Mitzrayim at night, but he did not understand the reason. Until Shadarsha ben Zayma came along and darshaned. Shenemar leman tizkar zayim tzitzacham eretz zayim. You should remember the days of the Mitzrayim. Kol yimei chayecha. Yimei chayecha. Hayom remember the days. Kol yimei chayecha zalei Elois. This is where we learn out the obligation to say Kriya Shema at night. Chachamim fundamentally disagree. Chacham imrim yimei chayecha zalei mazeh. Kol is lahavi yemois haMashiach. Says the Gemara Tanya, what do you mean that we're going to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim during the times of Mashiach? But the Pasuk says, no the days are coming, we're no longer going to say, thank you Hashem for taking us out of Mitzrayim, Kim Chai Hashem. Rather, we're going to give praise to Hashem, we're going to give praise to Hashem for Mashiach, not for Yitzias Mitzrayim. So Amar Loi, the Chum responded, it's true that Yemais Mashiach will thank Hashem for Mashiach. But Loi Shete'aker Yitzias Mitzrayim in Mekayma doesn't mean that we uproot Yitzias Mitzrayim, that we're no longer going to mention it at all. Ela Shetei Shibun Malchus Iker Yitzias Mitzrayim Tafel Loi. Yitzias Mitzrayim will be auxiliary. Similarly, we find Likor Shemai Oid Yaakov. The Yaakovinu is told his name will not be anymore Yaakov, Kimi Yisrael Yeshemecha. Your name will be Israel. On the top of you, give him a Aleph. Not the name that Yaakov was uprooted. El Yisrael Iker. The Yaakov Tafel Loi. Similarly, we find Al Tizkar Rishonais. Says the Navi, do not recall the original earlier occurrences, the Kadmonias Al Tizbanu, and do not contemplate the earlier event. Al Tizkari Shainas as Shivin Malchus. Kadmonias Al Tizbanu Zayisias Mitzrayim. But rather continues the Navi Yeshai in the Oisa Chadasha at Titzvach, that the new miracles will sprout. Tani Rav Yosef Zubachames Goygu Magog. Marshal, what's the marshal of that which we were talking about? L'adam shei mahali derech chavag by Zev. He meets the Zev, a wolf, and he gets saved. The man of Ayim Esaber by the Chmais Zev. He's telling everyone about the incredible salvation from the Zev. Pagabayari, then he bumps into a lion and eats the man and he's saving the lion by Misar by the Chmais. Then he tells everyone about the incredible miracle with the lion. Pagabay Nachash, he meets a man and he meets a snake. Shacham Ma'isa Shneim, Ayim Esaber by the Chmais Nachash. Avkach Yisrael. Sarais Achronios Mishkachais Eser Rishonis. The latter Sarais caused us to quote unquote forget. Of course, we don't fully forget, but rather we focus on the newer salvations, as the Chacham say, Yemaisa Mashiach. Avraham, continuing to prove our point, says the Gemara 10 lines down, you give him a medal, first word of the line is Avraham. Says the Pasuk Avraham is Avraham. But what does that mean? It doesn't mean he's no longer Avraham, but rather it's Nasa Avla just adding on additional praises. Similarly, Sarai, who's Sarah, but Nasa Sarah Lu'umasa, she was a Sarai, she was a princess to her nation. Now Bar Kapara argues. Now the way that we're reading the Gemara, so that Tzlach learns it, that previously the Gemara was proving the previous Gemara that it's just additional praises, and now Tani Bar Kapara comes along with a new Shita that's arguing, because Bar Kapara says, you can't go backwards, and if you do, you're over in Hashem says your name is Avraham, so how can you call him Avraham afterwards? You transgress a negative commandment. You should be no longer called Avram. Ask the Gemara, if you call Sarai Sarah, Chanami, are you going to say as well that you transgress a pasuk? Says Gemara, no. Why? Because by Sarai, when her name was changed to Sarah, it wasn't for everyone. Rather, Hashem told specifically to Avraham, Sarai Sarai ki Sarah Shema. Her name is Sarah, but rather anyone else could still call her Sarai. Elamayata asked the Gemara, Curly Yaakov. If you call Yaakov Inu Yaakov Achanami, you're going to tell me that we transgress because his name is now Yisrael. Explains the Gemara, no. Shiny Yosef, the other Hadri Krux, the Pasuk itself reverted back and said, the Pasuk itself called him Yaakov, and therefore we are able to call him Yaakov afterwards. Master Rav Yesi, we conclude the parak by Rav Avram. So we see that the Pasuk still calls Avram. We just said a moment ago, you're not allowed to do that. A Pasuk in Nehemiah. That the Navi was recalling the earlier praises, but indeed we're not allowed to any longer call Avram according to Bar Kapara. But again, the first sheet could be arguing. This started as a dream 26 days ago, and Baruch Hashem, and the Iker is, of course, Chazara, trying to push a few minutes every day to Chazar these Gemaras. And we begin the new parak. The second parak says the Mishnah, Yikar Bat Torah. Someone is reading the Torah, V'gizman Mikra, and the time for Mikra comes, the time for Kriya Shema comes, says the Mishnah, Kivin Libai Yatsa. If you have intent, then you are yoked to the mitzvah of Kriya Shema. Continues the Mishnah Bibrakim. Between the paragraphs, literally as the Mishnah itself will explain, Shayal Ne'akavaid. If someone bumps into you, someone comes to see you, that he's an Adam Nechbad, he's an honorable person, you're allowed to ask him, you're allowed to say Shalom to him to start, Umeshiv, and if he says something to you, then what? Be'emsa. Even in the middle of a sentence, middle of a parak, I should say, you're able to respond to him. Shalom Ne'ayira. Excuse me, I read that totally incorrectly. One more time. Be'brakim Shalom Ne'akava, and Umeshiv, and he can respond. Uba in the middle of a parak, that's better. Shalom Ne'ayira. You're only able to ask and start off a conversation saying shalom to someone who you fear, Umeshiv, and you could respond to someone. Divrei Rabbi Meir, says Rabbi Meir. Meshiv meaning back to that same person, and what the Chiddush is, Rashi says, we will see in Mirza Hashem. Continues the Mishnah, that's Rabbi Meir. If you do be'emsa, middle of a parak, shalom ne'ayira, Umeshiv ne'akavoid. So out of Yira being a higher level, you're allowed to even start the conversation. But to respond is for cover. Barakim, Shalom Ne'akov L'Meish, Shalom L'Cholad. Eluhain bin Abrakim says the Mishnah, Bracha Rishon L'Shni, B'Shil L'Shema, B'Shema V'Ayim Shemaya, B'Ayim Shemaya, L'V'Yamer, V'Ayim V'Ayim V'Yatzev. Rav Yehuda Aimer, he argues on the last one, V'Ayim V'Yatzev, L'Yivsik, he says you cannot be Mafsik. Amr Rav Yishuv and Karcha Lama, Kaidme Barsha Shema, L'V'Ayim Shemaya. Why does Shema come first? First we accept the Omach Shemayim, and then V'acham Kabel of all mitzvahs, all the mitzvahs. First Hashem, and then the mitzvahs. V'ayim Shema L'V'Yomer, why Shevayim Shemayim Negbim V'Yom V'Nelaylo? V'Yomer Yidon Gela B'Yoim Bilvad, whether that's because V'Yomer is particularly Tzitzis, which is the daytime mitzvah, whether V'Yomer is Kriyas Yitzias Mitzrayim, but in relation to the mitzvahs, it's not as common, etc. Says the Gemara Shvami Nami Zazuchas Kavana for the first part of the Mishnah. It sounds like we are paskening. You need to have Kavana. Because it says you're reading in the Torah and it comes to Zman. It says Kivin Liboy. Says the Gemara, no, Mayim Kivin Liboy. What does that mean? Likroy. Just you have intent to read. Likroy Sakakari. What do you mean? The Mishnah said Hayakaire. You're saying Shema. Says the Gemara, you're right. You're just reading the words in order to be Magia to correct it. So you have to have intent now to Likroy to actually say every single word. Tanarabban on two lines to the wide lines. Kishma King Sava de Rabbi says Rabbi, you have to say Shema in the way that it's written in Lashon HaKodesh Chamaimrim. B'chol Lashon my time with the Rabbi Amar Kravai Baviyasan Yehu. Rabbanan who say it could be any Lashon my time. What do they say? Amar Kra Shema. B'chol Lashon Zata Shemea. So one hand we have the word Shema, which means any Lashon. On the other hand we have Vahayu, which means in the original word in Lashon HaKodesh. Ask the Gemara, now the proverbial game of Gemara, ping pong back and forth. She does Rabbi Shitzchamim on the first word line of the Rabbi Nami Oksiv Shema. What does he do with Shema? Says Rabbi, you have to hear the words of Shema in your ears. Rabbanan disagree and say you don't have to actually hear the words. Well, the Rabbanan Nami Oksiv Vahayu. What do the Rabbanan do with the word Vahayu? Because the Rabbanan hold we said in any lashon, so what do I have to say Vahayu? I'm afraid you can't read it backwards. For Rabbi Shleikim Afraim, and only where does he know that didn't read it backwards? Now for Dvarim Advarim. We conclude the Maimer says the Gemara Tesavi Rabbi the Choldar Kulam Chalash and Amra. Sounds like according to Rabbi the whole Torah can be said in any lashon. and therefore Davka Shema is in Lashon HaKodesh. These are Lashon HaKodesh. Now, if the altar has been in Lashon HaKodesh, then why? Because Rachman Alamali, why do we have to single it out by Shema V'Hayu? Explains the Gemara. Really, according to Rabbi, the whole Torah has to be said in Lashon HaKodesh. It's Rech. Still, we need the pasuk of V'Hayu. Should the cause of Shema? Since it says Shema, Lememra. Since it says Shema, therefore you would think it could be any lashon. V'Hayu means no Lashon HaKodesh. Lemeimer decipher Rabban on the flip side the Chol Torah Kula Lashon HaKodesh. Namra why things like that b'chol lashon? If that means said any lashon, Techsev l'chol lashon Namra Shema because Rachman Alamli. Why do you need Shema to teach me that Shema b'davka could be said any lashon? Again, Esok Mishum Techsev V'Hayu causes this balance of V'Hayu versus Shema. That's machlekes. The Rebbe says that Kriya Shema has to be said Davka Lashon HaKodesh, and the Chachamim say in any lashon. Parenthetically, we learn that Rebbe has a different chomer. You have to hear the words in your mouth, in your ears, when you say Shema, whereas the Chum disagree. I'll pick it up from Taner Rabban in the next year, B'siyata Dishmayo.